Hello, I'm Eric Landrum from the Psych Sessions Network and also a Season 3 co host of Teaching Matters, along with co host Dr. Rob McIntarfer from Lincoln Public Schools in Lincoln, Nebraska. We're pleased to bring you this collection of 10 episodes recorded from September 2021 through April 2022. Two episodes in Season 3 featured guests. In Episode 4, we speak with Casey Swanson from Plymouth High School in Canton, Michigan. And in Episode 10, we speak with Ginger Wickline from Georgia Southern University in Statesboro, Georgia. As usual, a wide range of topics are discussed across these 10 episodes. Here is just a sample: research methods, student mental health, hypothesis testing, fictions teachers tell themselves, self care tips, assessment chat, rubrics, AP psychology, IB psychology, high school teachers making connections with college teachers, understanding graphs, accreditation, rather than doing more, purposely doing less, the subjectivity of grading, study skills advice, modality switching during the semester, adapting to natural disasters in one's life, using storytelling purposely as a teaching strategy, the professional demeanor at conferences, improv for teachers, why oh why extra credit, STP's This Is How I Teach blog, hearing the diverse voices of teachers of psychology, and so much more. Please enjoy Season 3 of Teaching Matters from Psych Sessions. So, welcome to a very special episode of Teaching Matters with a very special guest. Rob, would you like to introduce our guest?
I would love to, Eric. This is your friend and mine, Ginger Wickline, and I'll let Ginger talk a little bit more about herself, but I want to talk about how I know Ginger. Ginger and I are the co-editors, Society for Teaching Psychology blog. I'm a member of STP, and this is how I teach. The blog has been around for a long time. I think the oldest post I've seen is from 2015 or 2016. And if anybody's listening to this and you haven't seen the blog, this is a plug, I guess, but it's fun teaching stories. And if you hear this podcast, you probably like teaching stories. It's a blog about teaching stories. So Ginger and I go out and find folks who we think might like to talk about teaching psychology, and we ask them to write a little thing. The latest one that we just put up contains one of the most embarrassing teacher stories I've ever read. So there's a free plug for you that'll get you to the blog. So that's how I know Ginger. And Ginger, can you tell anybody who's listening to this a little bit more about you?
Absolutely. Well, welcome and I guess welcome. Thank you for having me so much, Eric and Rob. It's certainly a pleasure to be with you today. I've enjoyed my work with the This Is How I Teach blog for the last couple years as a side hustle in order to help us connect with other teachers around the country that are really excited and want to grow their pedagogy and their experience. So I am currently an assistant professor at Georgia Southern, just tenured, which I think becomes official this fall, and previously from Miami University and a couple of other institutions of different kinds. And so I have a clinical psychology background. I do research in nonverbal communication and intercultural competence and scholarship of teaching and learning. And one of my passions across my work is really getting students connected with the community and each other in order to help build their skill sets. So and what I do for teaching, I've done some work in the scholarship realm on syllabi with Drew Appleby and trying to get students more specific about how the skill sets they're learning can help them get into graduate school and into the job market. And I love seeing that This Is How I Teach blog just share the different ways that people engage students, engage each other, and stay excited about their work. We all know that teaching is something that a lot of us do because we love it, and yet it takes a lot of time and energy. And one of the ways that I get re-energized is just by seeing how other people have tried things that make their job more interesting and have more impact on students, because that's really at the end of the day why we're here.
Well, thank you. First off, Ginger, thank you for being here with us to help us promote the This Is How I Teach blog. One of the things I love about that feature from STP is that you get short, bite-sized nuggets that you can really appreciate from a wide variety and diverse network of teachers. I mean, if you want the deep dive, there are STP ebooks, there's journal articles from Teaching of Psychology, but sometimes you just want a short little nugget of inspiration, which is why I like the blog feature that you both co-edit and you co-curate. And Rob, you started off with talking about the most recent entry, which of course, depending on when a person listens to this, it won't be necessarily the most recent. But would you say it's an April entry, April 2022 or March?
Yeah, when did I put that one up, Ginger? I think that was probably like April 15th or 16th. I'd have to look back at my calendar, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that you mentioned, and I know back in the olden days, I was actually asked to write an entry, and I did, and I was honored to do so. But I told a teaching failure story. And, when we post on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter about our teaching, we often tell stories of success or I won this award or I get to do this or I'm promoted with tenure and we should celebrate those things absolutely. But this is how I teach blog is an interesting safe space to talk about. You want to hear about the worst teaching mistake I ever made? Well, I actually shared it in my blog entry.
And that's a question that we've had in there for a long time. And in a very informal way, it avoids what a lot of us know as a publishing problem. It would be really useful if there was a great way to publish non-significant results, right? And I think there are some outlets for publishing non-significant results, but not that many. And the fact that we often don't get to hear about non-significant results is a problem in our scholarship. And I think that's true with teaching too. So maybe in a very small way, the This Is How I Teach blog pushes back on that problem.
I think it also might help and encourage younger instructors or just those who are feeling imposter syndrome, going, wow, everybody else seems to have it all together. And you know what? Some days we don't, or we learn our best places forward sometimes by the mistakes that we make. And so I think we need to just have that space sometimes to go, you know what? You didn't have this figured out. It's okay.
Mhm.
We
For
all
the
make
peop
mistakes, and they're an important part of that learning process, even for teachers. We expect it of our students, but we don't always give ourselves that same grace to just be like, hey, that person I talked to who was up on the front of the microphone at the conference, they've made mistakes too. They had someone looking out for them too. It's a process
you
always.
know, Ginger, absolutely. I remember coming home from my first years of teaching and talking to my wife at the time and going, I wish I could refund their tuition today. I was terrible. I was so bad. And, you know, we look around, if you look at the Susan Nolans, the Sue Francis, the Regan Gurungs, the Stephen Chews, they weren't born great teachers. They had to hone their craft. And you're exactly right. I mean, they had to make mistakes and they had to practice on as a grad student in their teaching or early career person. And if this is how I teach blog and capture that and help everybody realize that we're all imposters at something at some point, and that's a really good takeaway.
I love how you used the word safe space earlier. And I think that connects with this conversation. It's all about a community. And one way to form communities is to be vulnerable, to self-disclose and be vulnerable. I'm very grateful to everybody who's posted and will post on This Is How I Teach for showing moments of vulnerability and creating a community.
What I love about the blog too is a chance to hear from multiple voices. So one of the things that Rob and I have been working on this past year is to further diversify the kind of responses we're getting. We know that some people who are really outspoken don't mind just being on a blog, and we've been trying to reach out to a variety of individuals from different backgrounds, institutions across the country, and even in Canada and Puerto Rico this year to make sure that we're representing folks who teach in a lot of different contexts and come from a lot of different backgrounds so that we can see some of that beautiful ribbons of diversity that we have within the teaching community.
Well, and that's such an interesting point because I think there are so many teachers out there who might say to themselves, I have nothing to offer, or I'm only in my second or third year,
Yep.
or I'm only in my 10th or 11th year. Why would I bother to do that? And you never know when some kernel of an idea that you mention in a blog post is read by somebody somewhere. You mentioned an exercise that you do in intro site. And an intro site publisher goes, that's really cool. I wonder if we could use that in an instructor's manual. And that instructor's manual picks that up with permission. And then you're asked to edit that instructor's manual. And that instructor's manual gets asked to write a test item file. Nolan White became an author on Cicerelli and White because he wrote a really excellent review on the first volume of Cicerelli, who was an author with somebody else.
Wow.
And because he did a great job and showed a genuine interest, a couple of years later, they actually invited him to become a co-author. So you
Cool.
just never know, and so I would encourage like you said, maybe our minoritized colleagues, our first gen colleagues, our early career psychologist colleagues, you have more to offer than you think you do. And this is a great outlet. You could probably write this in a couple hours. It's something you can put on your CV. It's not peer reviewed, but it is editorially reviewed.
Mhm. Agreed. And sometimes we have people that we reach out to who at first say, well, I don't really teach undergrads anymore. I'm just supervising clinical work. And I'm like, that's still teaching too. We'd love to see the diversity of the different spaces, places, and people that we teach represented, whether the clinical supervision, whether that's at the high school level, if it's a small tribal college, if it's at a big R2 institution with a 300-person class. Like there are other people out like across the nation like you in that context that might be looking for just seeing their job represented or getting that extra incentive or like you said a nugget man, I'm glad you can edit to get that little nugget of truth that could help them this week. I think it's also a nice way when we see people at conferences, sometimes we can go back and see them represented on the blog and learn a little bit more about who they are when we didn't get to see them in the shared space, to know a little bit more about what drives them as teachers and scholars in this area.
That's a cool specific idea. So, anybody who's next time you get to go to a conference, Eric and I talk a lot about conferences, mostly wistfully. The next time people go to conferences, look at the speaker list and then you can look at STP. This is how I teach to see if they're represented on there. And you can also look at psych sessions to see if they're represented on there. And you can get a pretty nice little preview of what you might see at the conference.
But also, I think the blog provides another layer of opportunities. There are a lot of our faculty colleagues who don't have the budgets to go to conferences. And so you might not be able to go to a conference and hear those speakers, but you can have your voice through the blog. And so if you're at that small liberal arts college or that tribal college, or you're at an R1, but you're the lone professor of practice and you're not getting that support, you can still advance your craft, but through writing for This Is How I Teach.
Mentioned earlier that when she started helping with the blog, one of the huge benefits was she and I had these conversations about how important it is to start reaching out to different groups so that some folks who haven't had voices before or been underrepresented in this avenue before might be represented on the blog. And Ginger's made a lot of progress with that. Another aspect of diversity, not demographic diversity, but when I've mentioned to people before that I help with STP, This Is How I Teach blog, and if they ask another question, say it's been going for this many years, one of the earliest questions I get was, how much repetition do you get? They're all talking about teaching psychology. I mean, really, how many different ways are there to teach psychology? And I would challenge anybody to find two identical ideas on the blog somewhere. There's a lot of diversity, not just in authors, but we wish there was more, but in ideas represented and what courses and how you teach those courses represented in the different blog posts. We've even had a couple that we renamed This Is How I Taught because we recruited some folks who are retired. And we have a couple, I'm a member of SDP and This Is How I Taught for that perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and even if there was repetition, I don't think that would be a fatal flaw. I mean, people are using active learning styles, but they're using it in a different class or different level or high school, community college. I know a Ginger that one of your colleagues, Karen Knopfel, oftentimes thinks about how would I teach psychology in lesson plans to first graders and second graders. She's been asked
Wow.
to go into grade schools and elementary schools. And so, even if you're teaching the same content, how would you teach it in different context? I mean, how about that for a challenge? Take a concept and figure it out how to teach it for different levels. And how would you maximize that for different school settings?
It's a fast.
Psychology for first graders. I want to see that now.
They
I
teach
think
positive reinforcement to first graders.
Wow.
indeed, indeed. Karen has done some neat work that way. And I believe that she's shared some ideas on the Facebook page. I'm trying to think of where I saw her post that as well. So you're right. Always a
Ginger,
new angle, right?
Ginger, did we ask her for the blog yet?
I believe we did.
Oh,
And she was a little bit busy this year, but
okay.
if this is not going on the podcast version, I think we can twist her arm again.
Okay.
Maybe.
Sounds good.
I think this is a public ask right here. I got
Karen, I'm sorry.
Karen, I'm not sorry. I kind of think this is it, right? So
Another
we will
question.
include with show notes. I'm sure, is there a generic, this is how I teach at stp.org or at teachsite.org? Or how do people, if they wanted to contact either one of you?
The fastest way for on audio is probably if you use any decent search engine and you type in STP, this is how I teach, it's the first hit.
Okay. And then also when we release the show notes, it'll be in the notes. I'm not saying that we have to be done. I just want to make sure
Yeah.
if listeners are getting antsy, we'll be sure to provide links to actually to be able to contact either one of you through STP or to go directly to the blog and start enjoying what's there. So
Yeah. And there are instructions. Anybody who wants to contribute, there's instructions right at the top of the blog on how to contact us about a contribution.
do they write the contribution and then submit it, or do they get permission first and then it's edited? How does that work?
They send an email saying, yes, I'm interested. And there's 3 very short questions that they answer. And that tips off Ginger and I that they're interested. And we get really excited and send a very enthusiastic email back.
And so have you ever had to reject any submissions?
I haven't in my tenure. Well, yes, because people haven't been members of STP. They misunderstood the task and they weren't members of STP. And I remember there were a couple blog contributions that people wrote, but they never became members of STP. So we were never able to. I've never received a submission with a wildly irresponsible teaching idea that we had to say, no, we're not going to publish
And
this.
they weren't willing to pay the $25 after they'd done all
And they
the
just
work?
lost track of it. They just probably lost track of the project.
I'll tell you what, that $25 is the best professional development money I spend every year to have access to not only the blog, but the topics area and some of opportunities for grants and awards, the project syllabus, like all the good stuff that comes out of my ST membership is definitely worth that $25 each year.
And the journal.
And the journal as well, yes.
We mentioned connections before. Another thing I wanted to highlight is Eric, you helped us in the recent past. You and Garth helped us in the recent past. We decided to start connecting This Is How I Teach blog posts to Psych Sessions episodes. So we got a list of folks who have done Psych Sessions episodes, and we tried to go back, and anybody who's already published, who has a Psych Session episode, we linked to the podcast in their post. And
Awesome.
now we're actively recruiting from people who have done Psych Sessions.
That is great. And this is, I think it is public because it was in the last STP newsletter. STP is now a sponsor of Psych Sessions for the next 3 years.
Cool.
Wonderful.
And I actually think, hang on a second. When I say that, I have to read the following. The views or product endorsements expressed do not express the view, support, or endorsements of STP. So I have
Wow.
to say that every time I mention that legally in a memorandum of understanding. So
Wow.
I want to actually withhold our legal responsibilities, and I might edit that part out too.
Where we would like, Ginger and I talked with some other folks in STP, and we want to keep going with the This Is How I Teach blog post in maybe some special topic directions. That's not something we've explored too much in the past, other than during the pandemic. We started asking people how they were teaching remotely, whether they were teaching remotely, what their best tips were for teaching remotely. We've done some of that. But anybody who's listening to this, if there's some special topics you'd love to hear psych teachers talk about, we would like those suggestions. Some of the ones we've kicked around are IPI. And Eric, you and I have talked about the introductory psychology initiatives on our Teaching Matters podcast before. We're contemplating contacting people who have been involved in early efforts at the IPI, or maybe the new guidelines coming out, asking them specifically how they're changing their classes in response to some of the ideas that are coming out with the curriculum changes.
And I would suggest too that folks could also reach out to us and say, I'd like to do a blog that says, this is how I teach large classes. This is
That'd
how
be
I
great.
teach statistics. This is how I teach service learning. So if your contribution, you'd be interested in not showcasing you as an educator, but you in this strategy, please let us know. We can just add a little tag at the end so that somebody knows that this particular blog is suggestions for folks at community colleges, in clinical courses, who this is how I teach personality. So it could be a topic area or an approach that you would love to share with others, that we could do some suggestions from the audience as well.
Well, it'd be fun if those could be tagged and batched, almost like a
Mhm.
bid. If someone, it might not be the two of you, it might be someone who, almost like you invite a guest editor, you could invite a guest audio editor, or I'm sorry, you're no, not audio for you, it'd be for us. I guessed blog editor. This is how I teach research methods, and you invite 6 people to write about the blog entry of this is how I teach research methods. But there's so much that we don't share. Like, for example, this is how I teach, or this is how I handle educational access accommodations. This is how I handle accommodations. Like, this has become a huge issue for us at Boise State, in that we're getting students in the middle of the semester coming and saying, I've got COVID. I want my face to face class to become an online class of one, please. And they're going to what used to be called the Disability Resource Center. Now it's the Educational Access Center. And they're going to them. They're getting some sort of accommodation. I don't know what it is, because it's never revealed to us. And then they're coming to the department, and we're pushing back on that, because if I have a class of 80, it's really difficult, and I'm teaching face to face, and they're doing
Yeah.
group work, and
Yeah.
I've designed this class. I can't peel off one and have a class of 79 and now teach an online section of one. It's more than just, I'm going to broadcast on Zoom now. And so
Right.
I would love, this is how I teach blog series on how do you handle accommodations in such a way where you're fair to the student, but fair to yourself.
Yeah.
You find that balance.
And you're actually teaching and measuring what you need to teach and measure. Yeah.
Right. I
That's
don't
a good
want to
one.
penalize the student for a
Right.
situation, but at the same time, do I really have to invent, especially for an adjunct faculty member? They prepared the course in one modality, to ask them to teach a second modality in the same semester for the same amount of low pay is something that we struggle with.
Yeah.
Right. And sometimes adjunct or new faculty or graduate students would be the ones least likely to feel the space and privilege to speak up. They just think, oh, they asked for it, I have to do that. And I can see how that would be particularly tricky for folks with less power in that situation.
No,
Yeah.
gosh, that's right. Even this is how I teach blog series on how to say no.
And when, and maybe creative ways to say no, but if
I
any
know.
if any profession, or if any teaching profession might be able to tackle this. I mean, the psychology folks, we are interested in operational definitions and assessment and measuring outcomes in accurate ways. And I hope it'd be great to get some blog posts about how, so I got this student and they've got this accommodation, and I talked with them, and this is how they can best represent their learning. But here was a logistical nightmare that I had because I had 80 students. But hey, here's what we worked out. We worked out a slightly modified operational definition of assessment for them in this case that actually turned out to be better than what I was planning in the first place. I bet there are stories out there, and it'd be great to hear them.
It's almost like taking your first 4 words and going with that. This is how I
Mhm.
avoid burnout.
Yeah.
This is
Right.
how I honor accommodations. Or this is how I mean, it's not always about this is how I there, you know, I'm part of another podcast called Beyond Teaching. And the theme of that is all the things that we do that we were never taught in graduate school.
Hmm.
Like how do you write a book proposal? Well,
Yeah.
no one ever taught it, most of us in grad school how to do that. And that's almost like where we're dipping our toes. No one ever taught me how to handle accommodations in
Mhm.
graduate school. No one ever taught me how to say no. That's for damn sure. Graduate school.
No. What is this magical word you speak of?
Right. And when do you say no and it's going to hurt your
Yeah.
career? And when do you say no and it's not going to have any effect? And who do you go ask about it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Eric used the word tagging earlier, and Ginger and I have both been involved in another project on the STP site called the Tagging Project. So there's nothing more boring than web directions in an audio format. So I'll just say if you go to the Society for Teaching a Psychology page, which is teachpsych.org, whenever you get to the homepage, under resources, there's a new thing called the Tagging Project that kind of looks like a mess at the beginning. But when you go there, it opens up a page with a whole bunch of green words of different sizes. And what that is a word cloud. And a whole bunch of people involved in the site have volunteered their time to tag whatever their corner of the STP is with certain words, which means if you find a word on this list of green words that with a topic that you're interested in, like let's say we're Ginger and we click on clinical psychology, it takes you to a fairly comprehensive list of everything on the STP site, syllabi, this is how I teach posts, e-excellence essays, all of the different corners of the website that are tagged with clinical psychology. You can just look through. And by the way, we've tagged people's names too. If you're meeting somebody for the first time and you know they're an STP, you can click on their name and you can see everything on the STP site that they've contributed to.
But you got to spell their name correctly. Is that
You do.
probably a tip
You do.
there? Okay. Yeah.
You do.
Yeah.
You have to call Ginger Ginger instead of Genger or things like
Okay. All right. Just making sure. But how come humans had to do that and the algorithm couldn't do that?
Oh boy, if I knew the answer to that one, I'd probably be a coder. I don't know.
All right. Anything else the two of you want to add to for our audience about STP or this is how I teach blog or your experiences on this?
Well, I just want to put that very direct plug again that says reach out to us. You don't have to be an award winning teacher to be on the blog. We're all works in progress, and we'd love to hear from you if you're an STP member, whether you're a brand newbie or a retiree, you have things to offer. And so we hope
Mhm.
that you'll follow up and think about submitting something with us to share and encourage others as they walk their teaching journey.
That's well said. The only thing I want to add, we kind of to it before when we talked about the community. One of the things I like about it is there's kind of a democratizing or an egalitarian feel to the whole thing. There's a feel like we're all in this together. We all experience a lot of the same struggles. We're all just trying to figure this thing out. And I appreciate how vulnerable and honest people are in their blog posts to just let everybody know that someone has gone through what you're going through right now, and here's what they tried.
Well, thank you both very much, not only for what you do for STP, but also for your time today and sharing your stories. Highly appreciated.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for including me today.
You bet.
Good to see you.